In this episode, I am speaking with Kurt Schmidt, who is the author of the book, The Little Book of Networking, How to Grow Your Career One Conversation at a Time. I really like Kurt's book because it's an easy 1 to 2 hour read, and it's very actionable. It's very worth your time to get this book if you are reluctant to get back into networking. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 315 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I'm speaking with Kurt Schmidt, who is the author of the book, The Little Book of Networking, How to Grow Your Career One Conversation at a Time. I like Kurt's book because it's an easy 1 to 2 hour read, and it's very actionable. It is very worth your time to get this book if you are reluctant to get back into networking. Here is Kurt's bio. Kurt Schmidt is the president of Foundry, a pioneering software design agency that serves B2B industries. He's also the host of Schmidt List, a podcast with over 200 episodes connecting him with prominent leadership minds for over 5 years. With 20 plus years of leadership and business experience, Kurt has learned the best-kept secrets of career and business success. In the book, Little Book of Networking, Kurt penned the networking handbook to empower individuals seeking professional growth. I will be publishing several episodes about networking the next month. In a couple of weeks, I'll be speaking with my good friend Steve Harper, who is the author of the book Ripple Effect, Maximizing the Power of Relationships for Life and Business. My perception, and it's only my perception, that many of you are uncomfortable getting back out there and meeting people in real life. We have gotten used to speaking with people over the Zoom, but it's so important to meet people one-on-one in person. I will be spending much of the month of May back in the U.S., and I'm currently scheduling one-on-one time with a lot of people while in Austin. My wife and I will be traveling to Annapolis, Maryland to visit our son, his wife, and more importantly, their new sheepdoodle puppies. So I am following my own advice. This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot community, but more on that later. Now on to my discussion with Kurt Schmidt. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Kurt Schmidt on the podcast, and he has the book, The Little Book of Networking, How to Grow Your Career One Conversation at a Time. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It's such an honor to be here. I'm a big fan.
Why'd you write this book and why now?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking because, I've been early on in my career, I was a terrible networker. And because I assumed that you just send off your resume off into the black hole that is, the corporations, and you just wait for someone to pick you. And that's how that works. And I remember getting good lessons from my father, who is a minister and had built a couple of churches. And he told me, I never got a single person as part of the church without meeting them and talking with them. And so you're not going to find your dream job without meeting and talking to people. And so over the years, I got better and better at it. And it started to just become natural for me. But once the pandemic hit, I noticed a lot of people had gotten laid off. And so there was a number of people that I was getting referred to. One was people just coming out of school. And then the other was people that had worked somewhere for 25, 30 years and had gotten let go, and they were kind of stuck. And honestly, I was really frustrated listening to these people because they were hitting the job market. Both had the same exact problem. They had no outside network other than their either at their college they were at or at the company that they were at for all those years. And so, as you know, when you're at a company for 25, 30 years and you get laid off, you try to, contact those people you were working with to maybe network with them, but they don't want to have anything to do with you. Not because you're a bad person, but you can't provide them any benefit anymore, not being a part of the organization. The reason why they were talking with you is because you were the director of HR and now you're just, Sally. So there's no benefit to them. So it gets confusing and can be very lonely. And so I wrote the book specifically because I'm a big fan of, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. My dad gave me that book when I was like 15. I'm a big fan of the 20-minute networking meeting. The Go Giver is a great book as well. But the problem that I had is that none of these books gave tactical advice on how to network. And so that's, long story short, Mark, why I wrote the book is that I wanted to give people some tactical ways to not only grow their network, but to maintain it over time.
Yeah, the two challenges this audience has is, number one, when you've worked for the same company for 30 years, which I did for IBM for 22 years, is you become institutionalized.
Yes.
Right? All you know is how it works inside your own company.
Yes.
And the other problem is when you suddenly reach, particularly my age, I'm 66, but you hit your 60s, the people who pulled you along have largely disappeared.
Yes.
Some have retired, some are no longer in power, and others have, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, died.
Yep, sure.
So one of the things I like to tell people is you got to network down.
Yeah, because your network is your net worth, is what I know. I know it rhymes, but it's absolutely true. There's tons of different things, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. I mean, there's all these different anecdotes, and these anecdotes are anecdotes because it's real, not because somebody's being funny. And you look at some of the most successful people that are out there today. I mean, mostly it's because of their networks and where they grew up and the people that they knew. It's not because they were more talented or more special than anybody else, honestly. So, and to be honest, I've never really truly met a real extrovert in my life, because I get lots of people who say, well, I'm an introvert. And I'm like, everybody's an introvert. Even the people who are extroverts need downtime. They're not 24/7. So for me, to your point, when you work in a place for 30 years, 25 years, it's so much emotional labor that goes into the networking internally, right? Making sure that the other divisions or departments respect you, that your team respects you, that your boss respects you, because you're managing up and you're managing across and you're managing your teams. It's a lot of work. And so the idea of spending some of that time and that energy outside of work to do networking just isn't as attractive to people. But it's super important that you do.
So your first real chapter after the intro is why networking matters.
Yeah. Yep. And
tell us about that.
Yeah. So since the pandemic, and there's a lot of surveys that have gone on. For years, they've asked this, there's this group called the it's International Group of HR Directors on where people get their jobs, right? For years, they said that 70% of your job comes from networking, right? Everybody's heard kind of those terms before. Well, that since the pandemic has hit, that number has just increased every single year, over and over again. And if you look at the amount of executives or people that have worked as executives, or maybe not executives, but maybe right below and up, over 90% of those people get their jobs from networking, not from submitting a resume or anything like that. So a lot of the people that I talk to are people that have worked, for a long time in their career, and they're experienced and they know how to lead people. They know how to manage large teams. They know how to manage clients. and big accounts. And so they're looking for scale in their work, right? But scale doesn't come from you sending a Word document to somebody, and you can't translate that ability to handle things at scale. And so that's where networking and that personal network comes in. So for me, right now, if you are trying to grow in your career, or to your point, in the namesake of your podcast, that pivot, those opportunities are going to come more so from your network, more so now thanks to the pandemic, because we're in a lot less trusting society, right? We're all concerned about who did you vote for, what did you, are you vaccinated? Are you not like, trust has broken down in our just society a bit more, just overall. So, and we got spam. Sorry, I'm ranting here, but we get spam. We get messages on LinkedIn. We get email spam. We're not as trusting as we used to be. So that's why networking is more important than it's ever been.
After I had my near fatal bicycle accident, I went off to high school math for a couple of years, and then I did a 1-year stint, believe it or not, the Jewish Community Association of Austin, as building a corporate fundraising. And by the way, I'm not Jewish, so it was interesting. But I took that year to teach myself how to network, and it wasn't about me.
Nope.
And so, yeah, as I like, you have one section here in your chapter on make yourself networking makes you look desirable.
Yes. Yep.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So, exactly to your point, Mark, is that we're not going out to ask people for things, because that's one reason why people get turned off from networking so quickly, is because they think they're going out with their hat in their hand. And that is not the case at all. I look at it like I'm Santa Claus. I'm going out. I come bearing gifts. Because I want to give these people access to my network, to the people that I know. And so by finding the right people that I can add to my network, it grows my network, which allows me to connect more people to create more opportunities for folks. So over time, it isn't necessarily about, going out to get something, right? Because people think networking, okay, I go to an event, I slap on one of those stickers that says, hello, my name is Mark, and I awkwardly try to interrupt conversations that are already happening. That is not networking. That's a networking event, but that is not networking. Networking is a long-term, career-long exercise. And we're not taught it in school like we should be, right? I mean, they don't even teach you how to balance a checkbook in school. So don't be surprised that they don't teach you how to network. And networking over time is about, how can I build these micro partnerships with folks to trade value back and forth? And you might not have something of value to trade that day, but you might later on. And it's not about becoming best friends with these people, right? Because there's this gap that people always think, there's my coworkers and colleagues, right? Professional people. And then there's like people that go to my daughter's wedding, right? And there is these people in between, which are your professional contacts. You're not inviting them to your daughter's wedding, and you probably won't work with them in a full-time capacity. There's a chance, but probably not. And so in the middle that's where our garden is to cultivate our personal network. And that's where value comes in.
Yeah. I am a big fan of the concept of weak ties.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
I'm a big fan of strong opinions held weakly.
It's not the people who know you really well.
No.
It's the people who kind of know you.
Yep.
Because they know people you don't know.
Yes.
And the one example I always give, because you have young kids, is your kids' friends' parents.
Yes. There you go. Great example. Yep. Right? Or my kids' teachers, or their baseball coach. Right. And again, if I can maintain these relationships over time, and that's what I teach in the book, is how to maintain those relationships over a long period of time, that's when the opportunities come up, because you're always catching people at different points in their career, right, Mark? You're never always catching people at their best. And that's not the point, right? They say something in startup world, right? Bet on the jockey, not on the horse, right? So you meet somebody, they're super talented. You get each other. You have a similar mindset, and maybe right now they are just a mailroom employee, but you can tell this person's going places, and you really enjoy and you get value out of your conversations with that person. That's somebody to latch onto and keep checking in with a couple of times a year or more. Hey, what are you looking for now? This is what I'm looking for. I'm still looking for this.
Yep.
How's the kids? Great. Cool. All right. Well, let's talk, in another couple of weeks or a couple of months. It's pretty straightforward. These are about, the famous quote, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. So what we're trying to do as networkers is trying to raise the tide and take our network along with it.
This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot membership community. The Career Pivot membership community is a group of people from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they did not know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learn from each other and broaden their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Charles had to say about being part of the community.
Well, when I joined the community, I had experienced a lot of success in my career as a health researcher, but I had a calling that I should apply those skills in another way. And I didn't know how to do that. And I felt really uncomfortable with that feeling of uncertainty of where I should be going next. So through the community, I learned a lot of skills on how to advance and grow my knowledge in a way that allowed me to transition from a really technical area of health research to health policy. And through that process, I established a new network of colleagues to get me there. And it's allowed me now to work in an area that I again find I've got my mission back, and I'm excited to get up in the morning to go in and do something important.
You can't just join the community. I bring people into the community every few months in groups. You can sign up for the waiting list, so when I open the door for new members, you'll be notified. If you're interested in learning more about the endeavor and sign up for the waiting list, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, one of the things I used to do, I belonged to a breakfast club and back in Austin. And one of the things I learned to do was I lived in Austin. No one's from Austin. So I would always ask when I meet somebody, how'd you get to Austin? And of course, there would be the person who would tell me in a car. But the idea was to start asking them questions and keep on the conversation going and keep on asking them questions until I found something we had in common, something that we could relate with one another.
Exactly. Yep.
The funny one was, I came to Austin because I followed my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And then the next question is, are you still with him?
Yeah.
And the answer was almost always no.
Almost always no. Shocking.
So one of the issues, and I said, I've seen with my own audience, is people not taking the time to network. Either because for many of us, I know when we discussed before the pandemic, before we got on the call, when I went back to Austin I had 26 coffee meetings in 28 days. I found in the first 3 or 4 that my active listening skills had declined precipitously.
Yep.
And so it's getting back out there and making the time.
It is. It's a muscle. Yep.
Right. So you have a whole chapter on making time for network.
Yes. Yeah. I said something that I get a lot whenever I bring up networking as an opportunity. That's the number one pushback is not It's not I'm an introvert or I'm scared of people or things like that, which is funny because normally you would think maybe that's one of the biggest stoppers. But the biggest stopper is time. And to me, it's just that's just a lie. You're just not prioritizing it. You're just lying. It's the same with working out. You can make the time to work out if you care about your health. You can make the time to cook food instead of buy McDonald's. Like you can do it. You have to prioritize it. And so sometimes people learn much later how important some of these things are, right? Like people who smoke for 20 years and finally quit, and they're like, "Oh, I wish I would have quit a lot earlier." With networking, it is about a long-term success, is that you are building these micro partnerships over time. You're not trying to just capture lightning in a bottle by meeting the right person at the right time. Now, that could happen, absolutely. But will it? Probably not. I have so many people. I'll give you an example. Early on, I was building my company, and we had just had our second, and I was out networking a couple of times a week, and I was trying to fit it in with building the business and having a new baby at home. And number one, I was very intentional with my wife about why I was doing what I was doing and what the benefits were, that this was part of my career. This wasn't a chance to go out and get hammered with some strangers or something, right? That this was very purposeful. And so having an honest conversation with her on what my goals were also really helped build an environment of support in my home, which was really helpful. That transparency, and I talk about that in the book as well, is that if you're trying to do this stuff without talking about it, then it's really hard. Just like I said, if you're all of a sudden going to start running every single day to get more healthy, you probably want to have a conversation with your spouse if you have one, about why you're gone all of a sudden every day. For me, the whole idea of being able to do this for the long term, and be intentional about it is what makes the real difference, because consistency beats strategy every day of the week. You probably have seen people count calories and do all these things, but if they just went for a 20-minute run every single day, they would be healthier and probably lose weight just like they wanted to. They could avoid all the other things, drugs and meal plans and books and diets and all these other things. The problem is that people just aren't prioritizing it, and you can make the time. And so once you make the time, that's where you start seeing the opportunities come in, and then you be consistent and those opportunities will show up. It's matter of fact.
What that reminds me of, because we're both cyclists. Yeah. I used to have a buddy who would start looking for titanium parts to put on his bike to reduce a few ounces.
Yes, the whole weight thing. Yeah.
And I'm going,
I'm going to be faster.
Just lose some weight.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's all cheaper.
Just ride your bike more, and you see how light your bike becomes over time. It's amazing, But yeah, that's a great point, because once you become consistent at it and you start doing it and you're intentional about it and you know why you're doing it and you know that it isn't for short-term gain, it becomes really fun. Like the weight, it gets lifted off your shoulders. One of the things I loved about networking was because I'm a big reader. I love reading. But I tell you, most of the successful people I know, including myself, have learned most of the things that they're good at through other people and their relationships with other people, not from a book, not academic. I think I know a couple of economists who would argue, but most of them still follow top economists and what they do and what they say about things. So the idea is that if you can expose yourself to that many more people, imagine how much you grow personally. It's amazing, and it feels really good once you get going.
Yeah, I'm working right now on getting Steve Harper, a buddy of mine, who wrote the book, The Ripple Effect.
Yes. Yeah,
and,
I'm familiar with that book.
He's a good friend of mine, and he, the concept is every time you do something good for someone else,
yep,
it's like drop of water goes into a puddle and a ripple goes out.
Yep.
And that ripple may come back.
Yeah. Yes.
So, right.
Yep.
But the whole point is you don't know when.
Right.
Or if.
Yep.
Just create good karma and do good things.
Right. Yes. It's
pays
really
off.
that simple.
So the next section you have is on personal positioning, which many of us think of as personal branding or.
Yep.
How do you look at personal positioning?
Yeah. So that's the other thing that comes up is that people are like, well, I don't want to draw a bunch of attention to myself. Right. So that's the one thing is I have to remind people, like, you have a reputation. You are either contributing to that reputation or you are allowing other people to control the reputation for you. People are going to talk about you when you're not there. People are going to Google you, or a potential client or employer is going to look you up on LinkedIn. And they're going to derive what they derive from it. And if you're not intentional about contributing to that personal brand, which I know people hate the term, but I don't care. Just call it your reputation then. If you're not willing to contribute to your reputation and make sure it is updated, is consistent, and it is accurate and factual, then you don't have anybody to blame other than yourself. I know tons of people. This is just how humans work, right? So, for example, one of the things that I found during the research of my book that I found that was really interesting is that imagine, think of like 3 people you worked very closely with at a job that you've had in like the last 10 years. Think of 3 people that you had respect for, maybe didn't get to work with that much, but you respected them. You thought their reputation was good. Do you think that they need a job right now? Your immediate thing is probably no, because that's where our bias is. We have this optimistic bias around reputation. This person has a good reputation. They're probably fine, right? But if you look at statistics, 80% of people are dissatisfied with their job right now. So at least 1 or 2 out of those 3 people you just thought about are probably interested in talking to somebody about a new position. Okay. So again, this is just basic math. And if we look at the idea of networking as a way to deliver value to people and not to absorb value, your mindset really changes in a way that's very positive, not just for you, but it affects your network in a very positive way. So we have to think about that personal bias that we have. And so usually my first, when I do a speaking event on the book, and the first slide I bring up is lesson number 1 is get over yourself. That's number 1. Lesson number 2 is nobody cares. Okay. And lesson number 3 is nobody is coming to save you. So once we accept all of those things, it can free us a little bit to be like, okay, I don't really pay that much attention to my personal brand. So maybe I should spend a little bit of time on it. And nobody's really like snickering behind my back because I post some more pictures or things on LinkedIn than other people do, right? Because you look at LinkedIn, for example, perfect example, 2% or less than 2% of all active users, the tens of millions of active users on there actually post content, right? The rest of the people just are lurkers and just watch, okay? So it's an easy place to stand out in terms of career, that's for sure. And then the last is that nobody's coming to save you, nobody's coming to save you because they have no reason to come and save you. They don't know what they'd be saving you from anyways, because they don't know what you need, because you haven't been out there telling people what you're looking for. So yeah, nobody's coming to save you because nobody knows you need saving.
In your last section in your book, wait a minute, no one's going to save me?
Not unless they know what they need saving you from.
Oh God. I just had this big epiphany.
That's what I'm here. That's why I'm here.
So your last section in your book is on digital networking.
Yes.
And digital networking is so different than it used to be.
Yes. Yeah. Well, people have again, this is where a bias comes in, Mark, is that people think immediately of like Facebook and LinkedIn or Twitter, God forbid, or other places. So, like that, these big names and whichever, but there's so many pockets of groups where you can find, right? And Mark, you had mentioned you have a group of professionals that get together. There's so many people like Mark out there that have these very targeted, specific professional groups that you can find and become a part of, where it's easy to interact digitally. But a lot of those places also will have in-person or virtual, like Zoom calls or things like that to connect people. But immediately when people think of digital networking, they think of, I'm just going to message people. I'm going to connect with people on LinkedIn. Like, that's the lowest rung of it. But there's tons of other virtual groups out there, and very specific groups to who you are and what you're looking for. There's tons of them. And there's Eventbrite, which has events all the time. Those are great groups to join and be a part of. You can join a webinar around a subject you're interested in and start to connect with people virtually in the chat during the webinar. And then you can connect with them outside somewhere else and find other ways. So again, the idea of digital networking is not just another way to say use LinkedIn. Like, I think that's the problem. I was trying to get people over the understanding of that. Go to the places that speak to you and create a safe place for you. If LinkedIn doesn't feel like a safe place because you get a lot of spam or something like that, or Facebook isn't a safe place because it's Facebook, or Twitter or whatever, there's lots of other places you can find. And again, like a group like Mark has, or a group like any of these consultants out there that build courses and things around, you can find these great groups to network in. And you should diversify, just like they tell you, you're not right, your network is your net worth, right? What do they tell you about stocks? Diversify, right? It's the same thing with your networking tactics. You should be diversifying those things as well. Meeting with people with coffee is great, but it should just be one of the stocks you own.
I will tell you that starting this podcast 6 years ago or 5 years ago has been the greatest networking tool I have ever had.
Huge.
I have met so many cool people. I mean, I met you, Kurt.
You're too kind.
And to a large extent, people come to me now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was spent this morning digging through my emails, scheduling interviews. And I said, I've met people of power. I've had a couple of folks, I mean, big names who after the call, we've had a conversation and I gave them advice.
Yep.
And I'm going, what?
Yep. Yeah, but this is all about this is why putting yourself out there. And I say this to people in the networking groups, like, you don't have to go and start a podcast. I started a podcast 6 years ago myself. I'm still doing it. I'm on episode like 212, and it's fantastic. And to your point, it is a great tool for networking, but that is not the only thing you need to do. But in networking, consistency matters. So if you do a podcast, just do it and be consistent at it. If you do a blog post, fine. If you just post on LinkedIn or Facebook or in Twitter or whatever it is, at least once or twice a week or a day, that's consistency as well. It starts to build a group. It starts to show people whose values you align with. And, I see, Mark liked this thing from this group and I'm a fan of that group. That must mean me and Mark have something in common. That's a virtue signaling that I can see. And so maybe he's somebody, when he reaches out to connect with me, I can feel it's safe because I can see that we share similar values and things. Remember back to what I was saying before about why we live in a less trusting society overall. Those are the things where we're looking for people to be virtue signaling a bit more. So it allows us to feel like it's okay to go and talk to those people or network with those people. So the more that you're putting yourself out there in any fashion, is a positive note for yourself. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise, especially yourself. because that's the real thing. I get the same demons that come to me at night saying, who makes you so special? Why'd you, who cares? You wrote a book. You're a big dummy. Blah, blah, blah. I have the same demons that anybody else does, but my goals won't allow me to let those things overtake me. So I just keep beating my head against the wall, and here I am. Yeah, and it's been a good ride,
Well, Kurt, this has been a great conversation. If someone wanted to reach out and contact you and buy your book, how might they do that?
Yeah, so the book's on Amazon. It's called The Little Book of Networking. You can just search for that. It's pretty easy to find, and it's on there in a Kindle and a hard or paperback version. And then I'm most active probably on LinkedIn. So if you just look up Kurt with a K, Schmidt, Schmidt, just like the beer, it's nice and easy to find. So just look up Kurt Schmidt. I'm more than happy to connect with folks and check out the book. And I also have a podcast, so you can check that out as well. And I share a lot of insights into professional development, networking, career development on LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect with anybody from your audience that would find value in it.
And the name of your podcast is?
It's called Schmidt List. Yeah, it's my wife thought it would be funny to call up leaders and say, "Would you like to be on my Schmidt List?" And 6 years later, they still want to be on my Schmidt List.
Well, Kurt, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark. A big fan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Kurt's book is an easy read, and I found it very actionable. Go get the book. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. When you subscribe, you'll receive my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-315. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.